Respected chairperson, dignitaries, and fellow delegates. I'm Dr. Suhrith Bhattaram, a third-year medical resident, and today I would like to share with all of you my terrifying yet humbling experience during the COVID-19 lockdown. And the COVID. When I decided to pursue a career in emergency medicine in 2019, I thought I was equipped to handle any medical situation that would come my way. The very idea of being at the forefront of the hospital, managing acutely ill cases and diagnosing them within minutes was thrilling. The first moments with every patient are very crucial. These are the moments that would be the one that would determine whether someone would survive or someone would not. This was where we were needed the most, and this was where we played the pivotal role in saving lives. The satisfaction of breaking news to a family that their near and dear ones were safe and would live to fight another day remains unparalleled. We saved a lot more than we lost, and life was good. Then came around rumors of an illness from a different country that we heard was slowly but steadily making its way across the world. Few cases here, a few cases there. It was still very sporadic, nothing enough to warrant our attention. I mean, after all, we Indians are tough, our blood is strong, our roots run deep. We have fought these trivial illnesses. We, as a country, have faced a lot worse and lived through it. This novel coronavirus we thought would barely make a dent in our day to day lives. I still remember the very first COVID patient I ever saw. He was a very young gentleman, around 35 years of age, who was just driving to work on his two-wheeler when he had felt a little giddy and fallen over and scraped his knee. He had turned up for wound cleaning and dressing, and during a routine primary survey, to our surprise, we noticed that his oxygen saturation was around 82%, which was way lesser than the normal value, which is greater than 98. When asked, the patient vehemently denied any breathlessness. He was initially very adamant. He said the machines were broken and that he was feeling great. He said, I have no fever, cough, or breathlessness. I have heard of all these symptoms of the coronavirus on the television and the radio, and I swear I feel fine. But when we finally managed to convince him to get a chest x-ray, we were stunned. The sort of changes we saw on the x-ray were the ones we usually see in severely ill patients, the kind of patients that would turn up gasping for air, not those that would just casually walk into the ED to get a dressing done. So we got him admitted, an asymptomatic man who was in the hospital just because his doctors told him something was very wrong with him. Needless to say, he started developing symptoms a few hours later. Initially, it was just trivial breathlessness, but over the next 30 minutes, it progressed so rapidly that he was gasping for air while getting 100% oxygen. 20 minutes later, our only choice was to intubate the patient, stabilize his oxygen levels by putting him on a ventilator. He was safe and alive for now. Then the slow buzzing around me within minutes gave way to bustling. People around me inching away as if I was contaminated from an infection. I had intubated a COVID suspect. To those of you who don't know what intubation is, it is a medical procedure where a breathing tube is inserted into the trachea of a person and the patient is given air through a ventilator. This whole procedure exposes the intubator to the direct infective secretions of the patient. So as the news of my intubation spread, people started demanding on local hospital chat groups that I immediately be quarantined. Some even went far enough to say that my friends and my roommates should be quarantined as well. This exaggerated response was initially very amusing, but later the unpleasant side reared up, and it was actually very disappointing to see colleagues around me make excuses just to maintain safe distance, to see the fear and paranoia in the eyes of medical professionals who were supposed to keep their emotions separate from their work, from those who were supposed to put patients above all others. Luckily, as the number of cases rose steadily, the initial palpable fear of the virus slowly dissipated. We became more confident handling the cases, and we looked to each patient as a new mystery to solve and a new life to save. This enthusiasm, however, was curbed by a sudden shortage of personal protective equipment that loomed ominously in front of all of us. In a day or two, our fully stocked hospital and many others ran out of PPEs. We ran out of sanitizers and even basic necessities like face masks and gloves. It's hard to recall the number of days I worked in the hospital without gloves, seeing hundreds of patients, handling the sickest of the sick with nothing but bare hands, trying really hard not to get any bodily fluids on myself. And when I accidentally ended up with my hands covered in either sweat, blood, or urine, I was just very grateful that the hospital still stocked fresh water and soap. At this point, we were not just putting ourselves at risk, but we were also putting other patients at risk. But what could we really do? Forget dispensaries, even medical warehouses were out of all the essentials. I would like to share a painful experience on my part. I remember getting this really sick patient who was collapsing because he had been vomiting fresh blood for the last 1 hour. As we rushed to help him, we were informed that he had a communicable bloodborne infection, something that spreads through blood. And the sister informed us that we better wear gloves, which were obviously unavailable at that point. So the moments that ensued afterwards were some of the toughest of my life. To have to see someone collapse right in front of you and not be able to do anything about it left us all with a sense of gloom and helplessness that was very hard to shake off. But the next sick patient was brought in barely a minute later, and we just had to move on. Throngs of never ending patients, a severe shortage of manpower, medicines, and hospital beds was what we were faced with every day. What was once my happy place became a nightmare, and I simply longed for the clock to strike 8 so that someone would turn up to relieve me. Okay, maybe it is time I stop going on about how grim the situation was and talk about something comforting. Yes, the sky was clearer, the roads were emptier, the birds chirped louder, people got to spend more time with their families. Or so we heard. People came together while staying apart, and we got to read about all these wonderful love stories of love during the pandemic. But for me, the pandemic meant one thing and one thing alone: long, dreadfully tiring days at the hospital. I think as the time passed, people adjusted and masks became the new normal. And when the cases finally settled, everyone breathed a little easier. Restaurants and gyms opened up, and the roads were no longer empty, and a semblance of society began to form again. I have heard and read that there were a lot of pandemics before this, and that the COVID-19 pandemic had barely scratched the surface of what people had to go through in the past. And if this were true, I, for one, am very glad to have not lived through any of those. None of us can time or predict when the next disaster will turn up. Maybe it's already on its way, or maybe we won't see one in our lifetimes. And no matter how hard we try, it's always going to be very hard to prepare for the unknown. But what I feel matters in the end is how we react to said disaster, how we adapt our lives around it, how we sacrifice our needs and comforts for the greater good of society. Our need to survive at any cost makes humanity one of the most tenacious species this world has ever seen. Yet, we have lived on this planet only for a fraction of its life, and it would do us all very wise to remember that what were once the top predators of this world are nothing but dark burning embers of coal at the moment. The whole world was brought to its knees in a matter of months, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. So maybe it is time all of us take a breather, reassess our future goals, and ensure that we are moving ahead in a direction that is sustainable for ourselves and to the future generations to come. The circle of life must continue. New life is born and the old greats will fall. But all we can do is enjoy the moments we have in between. In conclusion, all I'd like to say is that the COVID-19 pandemic has been a terrifying yet very humbling experience, something I would never ever want to re experience. Thank you.